up. Well, right now, the Supreme Court is deciding the fate of the president's health care law. After 3 days of historic oral arguments, 9 justices are voting today on this constitutional challenge to the law. And with a final ruling not expected until June, businesses, states, even the federal government are scrambling to prepare for what lies ahead, whatever that might be. Fox Business Network's Rich Edson is live in Washington with more on this. Hi, Rich.
Hey, good afternoon, Jenna. And that's the problem. They don't know. The Supreme Court can easily strike the entire law, significant pieces of it, or just keep it all in place. For years, businesses and government regulators have been writing the details to make this law work, and the government timeline places a significant portion of this law already in place, eliminating lifetime limits on coverage, prohibiting insurance companies from rescinding coverage, increasing prescription benefits for seniors, requiring companies to offer insurance to those 26 years old and younger on their parents' plans, and regulations on how much insurance companies have to spend on health care. One analyst says putting this all in place has already cost companies millions. Still, many, he says, would benefit if the law disappeared.
The cost to unwind or unimplement, I think would be small relative to the high cost incurred to date and the even higher cost that would need to be incurred between now and 2014 when exchanges take effect. So again, I think most of the industry wouldn't mind, unwinding whatever has been spent. There are exceptions, including companies, that would benefit from the expansion of coverage to the uninsured.
And under the health care law, some businesses would likely make money as tens of millions of additional Americans would have health insurance paying their medical expenses. Though opponents say the Supreme Court striking down the health care law would be far better for business, as companies would avoid coverage mandates and billions in new taxes. Jenna?
We'll have to wait and see, Rich. Thank you very much, Rich Edson in D.C. for us, and we have more on this now.
That's right. Let's bring in Fox senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, you think that this law is going to be essentially thrown out entirely?
Well, I do, John, just from the tenor of the justices during the oral argument. An oral argument before the Supreme Court of the United States is not a test of the best lawyer. It's not a test of the law, and it's certainly not a game, particularly when the nation's eyes are watching. For Justice Kennedy to have asked the questions that he did in as early on in the argument as he did, in as sharp a way as he did, using a particular code word that he did, tells me that he has decided that this law is outside the confines of the Constitution. That's step number one. Step number two, of course, is what to do with the law. Do they invalidate just the parts that profoundly offend the Constitution, or do they decide that if they remove those parts, the rest of the law doesn't make any sense, and they might as well invalidate the whole thing? That is a process that the court will eventually come to a consensus on after it takes the initial votes, how they want to vote on the major issues, and then the justices who are assigned to write the opinions and dissents begin writing those opinions and dissents, and they begin circulating them among the other justices.
This thing was shepherded through Congress, or maybe rammed through Congress, under Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. She has said a number of interesting things, including the fact that we have to pass this bill before we can find out what's in it.
Right.
She also asked whether, well, incredulously, she was asked whether this bill was constitutional. Here is an exact transcript of what she had to say. I believe we have it. At any rate, she said...
Where specifically does the Constitution grant Congress the authority to enact an individual health insurance mandate?
Are you serious? Are you serious? We knew what we were doing when we passed this bill. It is ironclad constitutionally. What happens in the courts is another matter.
Okay, so ironclad constitutionally, but maybe not according to the Supreme Court?
Well, in fairness to her, I think she's speaking as a politician, not as a lawyer and not as a legal scholar. But I remember we interrogated Congressman Jim Clyburn, the number 3 ranking Democrat. Where in the Constitution is the federal government authorized to manage health care? He looked at me and he goes, Judge, most of what we do down here is not authorized by the Constitution. They are simply concerned with staying in power and with bringing home the bacon. They are not concerned with whether or not what they do is authorized resolved by the supreme law of the land. I think that Mrs. Pelosi will be unhappily surprised when we learn finally how the Supreme Court comes down on this in June. But for her to suggest that there isn't even a constitutional argument to be made reveals an embarrassing indifference or ignorance on her part.
There have been an awful lot of suggestions, primarily from the left, from talking heads on television and so forth, that if this court strikes down the law, it is going to be legislating. It's going to be writing law and maybe subverting the will of Congress. I suppose that last one could be accurate, but legislating?
Well, you know, that's an argument that both sides of the aisle make when a statute that they like is overturned. But think about it. The Supreme Court is the anti-democratic branch of the government. Its whole purpose is to assure that the Constitution is enforced, even when the majority is wrong. If we didn't have a system like this, then nothing could prevent a runaway majority in the Congress from taking the liberty or the property or the lives of whomever they wanted to take.
Well, the good news about all of this to me is that it has been a fascinating lesson in history and the workings of the Constitution and co-equal branches of government and all of that kind of thing.
Yes, it has. You have an expert on the Constitution seated right next to you, John.
I do. Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Thank you for the
I'm going to let her
shout-out.
speak now.
It's always nice. Judge, you're
Thanks.
welcome back anytime, Judge Napolitano.